Charles broadcasting live from warm, sunny, very warm, sunny Abu Dhabi. Today is November 30th, 2023. It's been a very long year, hasn't it been, for everybody? Wanted to make a video talking a little bit to elaborate more on my statements that I made during an AMA a little while ago, where I was talking about the absurdity of securities law in the United States. And I wanted to get into a bit more detail about it. You know, we have a bizarre situation in the cryptocurrency space right now where absurdity seems to exist and maximalism is at an all-time high. When I entered the space a very long time ago, Bitcoin was very small. There was really no substantive altcoin market, and everybody was very collegial. And we had, relatively speaking, good relationships with each other. Mining was done with GPUs or CPUs, depending upon the era. And there wasn't really no notion of exchanges, liquidity, these things. People trade on PowerPoints. People would buy Bitcoin through PayPal. We had things like BitMint. And it was like buying Xbox for Bitcoin, these types of things. Satoshi would talk about Namecoin and other things and say, hey, look at this innovation and look at these diversities, and try to keep the main chain a bit ideologically pure for purpose and make sure it didn't get overloaded. The reason Satoshi stayed anonymous, just lost my camera. There we go. The reason Satoshi stayed anonymous by his own admission was the legal ambiguity of issuing a currency. In the United States, things like Liberty Dollar, and a lot of people who had attempted, like the Ron Paul dollars, for example, the silver coins that were minted back in 2008, they didn't fare so well. And it is an ambiguous thing when somebody creates a digital asset and distributes that digital asset. And the unescapable reality that the Bitcoin maximalists cannot accept, but they believe it's immaculate conception, is that on day one, Satoshi had 100% of the hash power and complete and absolute control of the Bitcoin network. There was no notion of a fair launch. There couldn't have been. No one had the technical sophistication, as evidenced by the fact that it took Hal Finney, a deeply technical person, multiple tries to get a Bitcoin node working properly and sending transactions. So, at least some of the Bitcoin issued through the mining process were done in a completely centralized way, because only one actor mined them and had complete control over the network, and at any given time could have made arbitrary decisions to change that network in any way. Now they say, well, hang on a second here. It's now decentralized, and Bitcoin is a broad protocol, and there's many people, and there's many different actors, and no one person has that kind of influence over the system. That's a true statement. So then why is it the case that every single coin in the altcoin space, if they like to call us that, the altcoin space, that has those same facts and circumstances is always a security, always centralized, always a shitcoin, always a scam? Bitcoin's changed a lot. It went from a collegial environment where people were having fun and it's cool and interesting, and we'd all go to Bitcoin Talk and talk about our projects and various things, to almost a cult, where a group of people say a bunch of things. One is that everything but Bitcoin is a scam. Anyone who works outside of Bitcoin in the cryptocurrency industry is a criminal or misguided. There's no innovation except for Bitcoin. The only asset long-term that'll have any value is Bitcoin. Everything else is a security. Everything else is an illegal asset, and the people behind it need to be thrown into jail. These are statements made on a regular basis by Max Kaiser, by many people in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And they wear these statements proudly. They call us shitcoiners. Outside of the absurdity of it, outside of just the sheer madness of such a reality, such a statement, these types of things, and the misinformation that's spread, it also escapes the reality that A sole operator controlled the Bitcoin network for a non-trivial amount of time and has likely 8 to 10% of the entire supply. That's just an inescapable fact. It also completely belies the absurdity of registration. So they say you can't register Bitcoin as a security because it's not clear who would register. So let's say, for the sake of the argument, that you say Ethereum is a security. Who would register? Is it the Ethereum Foundation, Vitalik Buterin? Okay, well, what if they just disappear? Do we honestly believe for a moment that Ethereum would just go away? Do we honestly believe for a moment the people who have devoted their lives and efforts and billions of dollars of capital and built businesses on Ethereum would say, well, foundation's gone, let's just pack up shop and go home? No, we know that it's sufficiently decentralized that such a protocol would endure, which was the entire argument that the SEC had about the nature of Ethereum not being a security. It serves no policy consideration and it's sufficiently decentralized. So then that seems to be some sort of strange standard. And the problem we have as an industry is that it's not equally applied. There is no objectivity behind it. And no one has taken the time to clearly differentiate the operational reality of Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, or other tokens and coins. It's a completely milky water. And every single day, we're at a complete loss where things are simultaneously a currency, a commodity, a security, subject to regulation, not subject to regulation, subject to registration, not subject to registration. And it's not even clear how these things would operate. And there's so many great people who wake up every single day who all they want to do is innovate and build, whether it be people doing research with zero knowledge cryptography, whether it be people who do great research in consensus and come up with completely new protocols, new BFT protocols, new proof of stake protocols, enhancements to proof of work, new ways of incentivizing people to provide decentralized storage, new network stacks, new ways of thinking about Byzantine resistance and peer-to-peer, new ways of thinking about using the blockchain to do things that we never intended it to do, whatever that might be. Every single one of those people by the Bitcoin maximalists are called criminals, evil, stupid, misguided, and there's no advancement from them. I'm told repeatedly that we just need to all get along. And you have to really ask yourself, if one group of people are saying, let's work together, and another group of people are saying that group of people are evil, stupid criminals whose only purpose is to defraud others, how exactly do we have a copacetic working relationship? And why would we want to work with that group of people? Why would we wake up every day and say, those are our people too? Let's be very clear. There are companies and members of the Bitcoin space that have actively lobbied Congress and the US federal government to criminalize altcoins. That's a fact. I know that for a fact. I've spoken with staff of lawmakers who that same day spoke to members of the Bitcoin community, prominent influencers, who literally just had a meeting where they were told everything but Bitcoin should be made illegal in the United States. And yet we're told, let's just all get along. There's no way to get along on that facts and circumstances. As with all these projects, they tend to start with a small group of people, all open source projects, almost every single one, whether it be Linux with Linus Torvalds or Rich Hickey with Cloture, any usual open source project, small group of people come together, they think of a few magical things, they build an ecosystem and a community, and over time, the governance of that and the ecosystem changes. It decentralizes. People leave, people die, people retire, new people come, new ideas come, and that's what makes these projects so remarkable and so amazing and so much fun to participate in, because you can go away for 5 years and come back and see a completely different ecosystem. Bitcoin was no different. From day one, it was a sole miner, a sole architect, One person had, or one group had complete control over the code and protocol. You can't escape that if you live in the Bitcoin space. We don't know because that person is anonymous, chose to stay anonymous because of the legal ambiguity, what financial arrangements were made. For example, talk about ICOs, talk about private sales. You in the Bitcoin community seem so in love with criticizing Cardano. What if Satoshi Nakamoto wanted to take 2 years off from work and made a side deal with one of his friends and said, I'm going to mine this thing called Bitcoin, and I'll give you 5% of whatever I mine in exchange for giving me 2 years' salary so I can go and work on this? Guess that's kind of a ICO. Guess it's kind of a pre-sale. Product doesn't exist. Do you know it? It's a private deal. So if a group of companies overseas get together and they finance in Japan or somewhere else a completely unrelated thing, somehow, some way, we should apply that there, but not with Bitcoin. We don't know. It's so far gone. And this by design, because here, let's be adults. Let's really talk about this. The reason this is happening is that the people who run the show, who want CBDCs, the people who run the world, they understand that if the world gets back control of its money, of its voting, of its identity and data, that it's going to be really hard to put a global regime over humanity and have a small group of people run the whole show. So what they do is they try to make sure that there's no projects or programs in the long term that return power to the people, make people their own bank, push power to the edges. They're real comfortable with things like Bitcoin because it's very clear how to control that. At the end of the day, the Bitcoin core protocol does not have smart contracts that are capable of doing the things that Cardano and Ethereum can do. There are no DEXs. There are no oracles. There are no algorithmic stablecoins. There are no on-chain DAOs. There is no on-chain infrastructure. All of the resources of that system are exogenous. And over time, the system will get too cumbersome to run on normal PCs. So the vast majority of users will leave their assets on regulated exchanges. The vast majority of users will use light wallets connected to some third-party source that probably will be regulated at some point. So if all your on and off ramps, all of your everyday use cases and are completely regulated, and you can't do much other than the fact that send tokens around, your miners come from ASICs, which have a limited supply chain, and there's an economy of scale that over time centralizes the mining operations to fewer and fewer actors, and they have a real hard time moving that resource because data centers are big. Doesn't that feel like a fairly easy thing to control? And doesn't that thing not feel like a big threat? It's not value stable. It's like gold, it's volatile. Governments can tolerate gold and still institute tyranny. Gold is traded in China. It's not a problem. But it is a problem having smart contracts. It is a problem having a programmable ledger. It is a problem with the trajectory of evolution of the non-Bitcoin cryptocurrencies. Because those cryptocurrencies have the capability to displace and replace most of the capabilities of sovereign governments. They can be marketplaces. They can be national ID systems. They can be national voting systems. They can be education systems, credential systems. They can be sound money. They can be all the things, supply chain systems, medical record systems. Yet the difference is they also can be decentralized. They play by consistent and fair rules for every single actor and player there. And over time, they become much more efficient and they learn from each other. That is the threat to the world order that we're marching towards. And that's the opportunity for us as an industry to have humanity take itself back so that we don't get ruled by kings again. So you'd figure the maximalists, if they truly believe in freedom, would say to themselves, it's a good idea to partner with and work with the broader industry. Instead, they call us criminals. Instead, they say everything but Bitcoin is a shit coin. They go to governments and praise them for taking actions against altcoins. Another thing is they love this idea of ETFs, BlackRock, others coming involved. Did you ever ask yourself what kind of power these institutions will have once they foment themselves in our industry? So let's say there's a fork. There's chain A and chain B. If all the services that you need to interface with those chains picks chain A and 90% of the community picks chain B, despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of people want to be on chain B, what happens? Chain A wins. Why? Because chain A is the only one with stablecoins. Chain A is the only one with exchange support. Chain A is the only one with all that consumer infrastructure. And that is the consequence of centralized stablecoins, centralized exchanges, financial infrastructure like ETFs and these types of things. You are handing the democratic control over what's legitimate, what's not, to someone else. And they say, oh, but we solved that in the Bitcoin space. Whichever one has the most hash power wins. Okay, that might be true, but what if they support the minority chain? And the majority chain, they say, well, not going to list it. Well, the value of that chain goes down. What does that mean? It means that the miners switch over because they're mercenary. That's the economic model there. You have to make more than you spend. It's not a charity. You see the problem here. You see, and so it's worthwhile to have a broader conversation about diversifying consensus. One of our protocols we invented was Minotaur, multi-resource consensus, where you can put proof of work and proof of stake and other protocols together in the same network. Now, why would I want to do that? Because maybe one of them is compromised and the other ones are belt and suspenders, a fallback. You'd figure that this would be lauded as an innovation. You go over to Team Orange, they say that doesn't exist. Even if it did exist, it's somehow insecure and it's a scam. Every single day, the drum beats. Every single day. That's what they say. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's so profoundly frustrating and distasteful, especially for people who have been in the industry as long as I have, because I remember when this was not the case. I remember when people were decent to each other. I remember when people didn't have these types of problems. I remember when the majority of people in the cryptocurrency space remembered why cryptocurrencies were created. A strong distrust of centralization, a strong distrust of institutions, and a belief that governments were no longer capable of creating sound money and sound infrastructure. And the very first block of Bitcoin was a reference to the 2008 banking crisis as a symbol of the moral failings of those who came before us. That's not the same Bitcoin as it is today. It's a different ecosystem, it's a different group of people. I'd argue the majority of people that hold it know nothing of the philosophy and don't care about it and view it as just another asset, whether they be a financial institution or a fair weather investor. The libertarian cores have completely dissolved and gone elsewhere in our industry. And yeah, there's still a few hardliners here and there. And that's fine. All I ask is, why are you so judgmental about the rest of the industry? The existence of Cardano is a net benefit to Bitcoin, whether they want to admit it or not. For years, Bitcoin tried to discuss things like color coins. They tried to discuss things about how to do smart contracts on Bitcoin. Projects like Simplicity, projects like BitML, years and years of thought and effort. Meanwhile, Cardano took UTXO, extended it, and figured out how to put a smart contract language on and preserve and protect the exact same type of model that Bitcoin seeks to preserve and protect. So it is a case study for how one would do smart contracts in a responsible way on Bitcoin. And had that knowledge existed I would bet every dollar I have that Satoshi would have used it to put smart contracts on Bitcoin when he launched it in January 3rd of 2009. When we look at other pieces of research in the portfolio, for example, Cardano native assets was inspired from color coins. And had that existed at the time Satoshi created Bitcoin, it likely would have been put into the protocol. We know this because he talked about it. We also know this because in the case of smart contracts, Bitcoin script used to be much more expressive. It was dialed back when bugs were found that were catastrophic. Google the Bitcoin inflation bug as an example. Some of us are old enough to remember these types of things inside the industry. There are dozens of other things in the portfolio. NEPA PALs are another example. Non-interactive proofs of proof of work, which if implemented in Bitcoin, at frankly no security cost to it, it's a protocol enhancement, very lightweight one, would enable side chains and extremely efficient light clients in Bitcoin. There are dozens of innovations there. They're in the open domain, they're not patented, and they're freely accessible for all. And they give a lot of inspiration into a roadmap that can bring Bitcoin into our century, not the last one. They're ignored. And make matters worse, we're labeled a scam, a criminal enterprise, and a shitcoin by that community, at least the leaders of it. It's really offensive. I'm a definitions guy. I care a lot about basic rules, definitions, inclusive accountability. I ask people again and again, what is the definition of decentralization? And it turns out it's a very complicated question. So we put our money where our mouth was and financed the creation of the Edinburgh Decentralization Index through a grant. Now, that index, the whole purpose of it is to study the notion of decentralization for the purpose of producing a metric, a number, so you can objectively look at networks like Bitcoin, Ethereum, Cardano, Algorand, Polkadot, layer ones. You can even look at layer twos, you can look at dApps and DeFi applications and ask a very simple question, how decentralized? And we can measure these things. We can debate whether the measurement is legitimate or not, or it didn't factor something in or not, but the exercise in itself is undebatable. Why? Because we want to understand, as an industry, definitively, what are the benchmarks? If Bitcoin is the hallmark of decentralization, that ought to be the number we aspire to as layer ones. And since Ethereum is sufficiently decentralized and thus not a security according to the SEC, maybe today it is, who knows, it's inconsistent. Is it less or more? We should measure that. And that's something for the industry to discuss. These are the initiatives that bring us forward because they bring objectivity, inclusivity, and truth to a discussion, not the politics of personal destruction. And in my email, you could see I was very angry. And I'm not angry at Bitcoin. I'm angry, of course, about how that side seems to treat us. And it's perplexing, but doesn't really bother me as much as it bothers some others. I'm angry over the inconsistency of policy because at the end of the day, I am an American citizen. I live in America, got a ranch in Wyoming and a farm in Colorado, and I'm going to die in America. It's my country, for better or for worse. And it brings no pleasure to me to watch my nation declare war on an industry that not only would liberate it from many of its biggest problems, but also guarantees that we will miss out on a multi-trillion-dollar revolution that is the future of the global economy. Imagine if in the 1970s, the United States decided that the semiconductor revolution, the computer revolution, is not for it, and to make Silicon Valley illegal, to make Microsoft illegal, to make Apple illegal, and all those companies go somewhere else. 10 years later, say, well, maybe we got it wrong. Come back. Do you think Germany can convince Microsoft, Google, and Apple to leave the United States now, no matter how sweet they make it? No, it's too late. So if you offshore the entire cryptocurrency industry, it won't come back. And what that translates to is a more grim economic reality for the United States as a whole. And this deeply frustrates me. Went to college in a few places, but one of which was Metro State. I remember fondly as a teenager walking down 16th Street Mall, going through Civic Center Park, spending time Capitol Hill. A girlfriend at the time had an apartment right off Capitol Hill. Spent a lot of time there. There were some homeless, but by no means as many as I see today. There weren't encampments in cities. The crime is much worse. You can see the luster of Denver fading. And this is a truth we see in a lot of cities, from San Francisco on down. The United States is systemically getting poorer, sicker, and more fragmented. That's just a fact. People are getting angrier and more hopeless, more cynical. Our trust in institutions is at an all-time low. How you get out of that, in part, is by reigniting the economic engine of the United States. And the reality is, because of this war on crypto, one of the pillars of the future is now being lost by our nation. So understandably, that really fucking pisses me off. Absolutely pisses me off. Because after they destroy the industry in the United States, the people who did it will retire, get promoted, move on. They won't apologize. Right. The hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of legal fees will never be reimbursed. And a bitterness will exist for a generation of entrepreneurs about doing business with the United States. Serves no value to us from a national security perspective, from an economic security perspective, from a political perspective, and just common sense. And there's no consistency to it. Winners and losers are arbitrary. The people who are powerful, they're doing this, and they're turning us against each other. And we're all going crazy. At the end of the day, take a step back and ask yourself, realistically, how different is a Bitcoiner from an Ethereum person, from a Cardano person, or a Ripple person? At the end of the day, we all use wallets. There's public keys and private keys, concept of consensus. There are networks, there are applications. The vast majority of us are about 98% similar. We're radically different from the banks, but at the end of the day, we have so much more in common. It's like dialects of English. You might have a Southern accent, a Boston accent. You could have a California accent, but you're still speaking English at the end of the day. There's a lot of commonality there, common understanding there. Yet, look at where all the fights are happening. Look at where we seem to spend most of our time as an industry on Twitter and other places. Look at where the YouTube videos are, the criticism are. Compare the ratio of one against another versus the industry as a whole speaking out against the indignation of a systematic effort to destroy the cryptocurrency business in the United States. You'll have your answer. It's got to stop. It really has to. You know, another thing is taking a 2-hour AMA and pulling out a clip and then just fomenting rage about these things. It doesn't serve anybody any purposes. I understand why people do it. They want clicks, they want accolades, and that's the nature of social media. But you have to understand the nature of our technology. Being your own bank, owning your own identity, having control of your own voice, preserving and protecting the freedom of association and commerce and expression, these things require maturity and responsibility. They require integrity. They require accountability. They require some investment of time. They're not minor details. They're not minor things. And if we as an industry are so immature that we're unwilling to even speak the truth to each other, then how can we ever once think that we're going to be able to be in charge of our own lives? And that's the great truth. And it's the harsh reality and the harsh truth. We just got to grow up. And there's no ecosystem that has to grow up more than the Bitcoin ecosystem. The altcoin space shouldn't be called the altcoin space anymore. We're one industry. We're the cryptocurrency and blockchain industry. Every single cryptocurrency and blockchain that's legitimate chain that has a legitimate effort behind it is here to do something. There are many people who have dedicated their lives and their careers, their money, and in many cases their freedom to trying to pursue to do something interesting, unique, and beneficial. And we should treasure these differences. We should treasure these initiatives and efforts and learn from each other. It's not okay to attack and say, well, everybody but my tribe is evil. I can fully appreciate and respect some rivalries and differences and some, fun banter. We do this in sports. The Kansas City Chiefs play the Broncos. And if you're a Kansas City fan, of course the Broncos are bad. And if you're a Broncos fan, of course KC is bad. But it's not mean-spirited, and it's not an extent where you say the coach of the Kansas City Chiefs should be arrested and is a criminal. And that's where we're at right now. That utter lack of empathy, that utter lack of civility, and frankly, common sense. Now, you might not believe that. And you might believe everything's copacetic and fine. Well, I can tell you right now, it's not fine. Every single day, institutions are slowly absorbing our industry and capturing the industry. From subtle policy recommendations for OFAC to the definition of a broker to a tax on non-custodial wallets to things slipped in on the 11th hour in transnational frameworks to discussion of trying to score mining against carbon output to the attacks on the exchanges to definitions about what is a security and what's not to unbanking cryptocurrency companies. It's getting uncomfortable for every single venture because there's a change to embrace and extinguish the industry by the traditional TradFi space. And suddenly people will be replaced with actors that look a lot like the actors we sought to get rid of in 2009 when Bitcoin first came out. The actors who were responsible for the 2008 financial crisis and the future crises that will come. That is what is happening right now, right here, like a boiling frog in a pot. And you can sit and be a maximalist, talk about how great it is to go to CoinMarketCap and watch your Bitcoin go up 5%, and how smart you are, and all the things you're going to buy when the moon comes. But you know what? You're being boiled alive. The only way we get out of this is to recognize that that which unites us is a hell of a lot more than that which separates and divides us, and to come together as an industry and push back because we have money as an industry. There's value here. There's millions of people here. And if we were united as an industry, we would be so powerful and so capable. And for the first time in the history of humanity, we would be in absolute control of our voice, our identity, and our money. For the first time in human history, we'll go from don't be evil to can't be evil. For the first time in human history, we can preserve and protect for all humanity, not just special groups of people, the freedom of association, commerce, and expression. We have the technological trajectory to do this. We have the brain power to do this. We have the engineers to do this. The only reason we would not accomplish this is if we kill each other. That's it. And that's the decision we have to make. So as you make your YouTube videos, as you tweet, as you make your comments, really take a moment, take a time out, and reflect. Why are you here? What do you want to accomplish? What do you want to do? What's the point of this? What's the point of your own life? What type of world do you want to live in? Where do you want to live? When is it too far? When are you in the pot being boiled? We are so close to CBDCs. We are so close to AI being integrated with CBDCs and social credit becoming a universal concern. We are so close as a society to you going to a gas station and trying to buy some gas and saying, sorry, you've already filled your tank this week. You can't do it again. Sorry, you've already bought this thing. You can't buy any more. Sorry, you belong to the wrong group of people. You're not allowed to buy that. Sorry, you pay a different price than this other group of people because you're in a different part of the grievance hierarchy. It's not a hypothetical thing. They write papers about this. They talk about it. Old Klaus says you'll own nothing and be happy. They say this is the only way to prevent a climate catastrophe. They say this is the only way to run the world moving forward. And we have whole nation states like China pursuing it and giving us paint by numbers reality for that. The very same people doing that are the people writing policy papers about how the United States needs to do it and creating a step-by-step guide to do that. And that is something that's going to happen in the next 10 or 20 years if we're not careful. I'm old enough to remember how 2 weeks to slow the spread became papers, please. And we had to show vaccine cards to go into Starbucks. Remember when people said such a thing would never come to pass in the United States, but it did. It's fragile freedom. And technology's gotten too good. Globalization has gotten too pervasive, and corporations have gotten too big. Governments have become too esoteric and unaccountable, and the bureaucracy of governments is more powerful than any elected official. That's a universal truth for most modern society. The social contract upon which modern constitutional republics have been founded and democracies have been founded is becoming unraveled, and it needs to be renegotiated and reestablished. The whole point of the blockchain and cryptocurrency industry, every single one of us, is to establish a new social contract where our liberty is preserved and protected, and we do not live under a technocratic tyranny. That is the point. That is the reason the laborers exist. That is who we are. And a lot of good people go to work every single day to try to preserve and protect that. They're not criminals. They're not evil people. They're not shitcoiners. They're not here to steal from you. They're here to try to make the world a better place. That's what I fight for. That's who I am. It's why all our papers are open. It's why we write all this code. It's why we built Cardano. It's why I worked on Ethereum before that. And it's why I'm still here. I don't have to be. I really don't. I can go do anything in life. I'm in that position. I choose to be here because this is the place to be. There's nothing in my life I can do, or frankly, other entrepreneurs in this industry could do that's more consequential and significant than being here right now, because we're on the front lines of a conflict of philosophy. And we have a small window of time to unify and work together to make this world a better place. And if we let that slip because we're divided, by default, we just have to live with the consequences of centuries of darkness. I don't want to live in that world. I don't want to reflect upon the fact that we could have won, but we didn't, and we allowed that to slip through our hands. And I don't think the vast majority of you living, if you really think about this, want that world either. So ultimately, it's your decision. It's your choice. And it starts with you. Take your agency back, your self-integrity. Take a moment. And before you tweet, before you post on Reddit, before you consume something on YouTube, take a real moment and think about it. And ask yourself, is this really the path forward? Or maybe we should choose an alternative one. I'm not advocating this video one cryptocurrency or blockchain technology over another. Just like when I spoke before Congress, I didn't mention the word Cardano once. Why? Because it wasn't about Cardano. I was there to represent the industry as a whole and fight for all of us in the industry. And you have to ask yourself, are you here for that? Or are you here for the gains? Are you here for your particular ecosystem, your particular team? Everyone else is evil. And ask yourself, what are the consequences of that? Where does that lead? We don't get many of these opportunities in life. We really don't. They come up once a century, usually when an empire starts dying or in the back of a big conflict, big war, a revolution. It's a rare window where, for the first time in my life and in your lives, we've actually have a real shot to change things for the better for everyone. Why are we going to let that slip through our hands? Why should we? It's been a very long 10 years. Y'all comment about how old I look, and didn't have as much gray in this beard. Didn't I had more hair on my head. It's tough. It's pretty demanding, the travel schedule, and it's pretty demanding waking up every day and pushing forward. But you know what? I'm not tired. I'm still got a lot of fire in me. And I still believe we can win this. I still believe that our best days are ahead of us. There are certainly some harder ones, and it's gotten a lot meaner and it's gotten a lot more vicious. And it's been very puzzling. And it makes me think, well, I have to change the approach then. Makes me think maybe we use different channels and different communication. Maybe it's just a sign of the times. And I really do envy the fact that Satoshi was anonymous. I truly wish there was a way to have built Cardano like that, because perhaps it would have been more effective. Perhaps it would have not resulted in these things. On the other hand, the MAs and the publicity, it inspired a lot of people. And I meet countless people every place I go that do watch and do listen. So it's a double-edged sword, and there's a lot of good with the bad. But in any event, I'm still here. I'll still be here. And I'd like to believe that the majority of you really understand what I'm saying and are going to be here and keep fighting with us. Cardano's not going anywhere. It's going to keep growing. It's going to keep evolving. It's going to keep showing how to do things in a really interesting way. I don't believe Bitcoin's going to go anywhere. I do believe it's losing its light and luster. I do believe it's becoming less relevant year by year as technology moves on. I do believe Ethereum is going to continue being here. I do believe many of the projects in the ecosystem will be here. And I believe we'll have a lot of new ones that come that we have to be studying and understand and be inspired from. But I don't believe for a moment that any one of these things is somehow wrong. I believe each and every one of them brings something to the space, brings some value to the space, and we ought to learn from each other and talk to each other and grow from each other. I fully admit that there are some innovative projects that exist in the Bitcoin space, like people working on Lightning, people working at Blockstream. They're doing innovative things with many of their projects. And I fully admit those are super difficult projects because Bitcoin is so ridiculously unforgiving to changes. And there's a humongous amount of unnecessary engineering to get these products to work because of the limited expressiveness of Bitcoin. And that is what it is. And for those who choose to be in that space and those who choose to build those types of things, it's an admirable effort to try to upgrade the unupgradable. It reminds me, when I was a kid, I watched an IMAX documentary on upgrading the Hubble telescope. And they talked about how the fact that the telescope wasn't designed to be upgraded, not on the ground, but certainly not in space. And the astronauts had to figure out how to unscrew tiny screws while wearing their space gloves. And they said it's like performing brain surgery with oven mitts. Now they got it done and they fixed it, but it was unnecessarily hard because of the nature of the platform. And it's very similar when you think of Bitcoin. So kudos to the people that do those extraordinary things and try really hard to bring more functionality to something that wasn't designed for it. And there's a lot one can learn from them. And there's a lot of inspiration one can gain from that effort. We never once criticized it. We never once said it wasn't a good idea. And there's a lot of things we learned from it that were inspired Hydra. There's a lot of things we learned from it that inspired extended UTXO and Cardano native assets and other things. And we published those things, and hopefully those things can work their way back upstream, back to the originator. That's how it should be. And that's how an ecosystem should be. And I don't for a moment say the people working on those projects are evil, criminals, and should be in prison. I don't for a moment When I go and talk to senators and congressmen, say they should pass laws to make those people criminals. I don't. All I ask for is have the same dignity and respect on the other side of the aisle. That's it. And let's recognize that we're here and have much more in common with each other than we did before. And we ought to work together. We ought to find common ground to actually get us to a point where we get our power back. That's what I'd like. So, anyway, I hope this brings some more clarity to my thoughts and my comments. And I can't wait to see how it gets chopped up and received. I hope you truly do understand where I'm coming from. You know, I speak a lot, and the challenge and danger of that is by speaking a lot, it's very easy for people to take a snippet here, a phrase there, a video here, and turn it into something different. So every now and then I have to make a video and talk about it in more detail and hopefully clarify things. And I'll just keep doing that. Thanks, everyone.